Hour number 3 of the Green Mountain Mornings program here on WKVT with your host, Chris Lenois. Spending the remainder of today's program with Chris Mays of the Brattleboro Reformer, however, in here for our regular Tuesday conversation about news that happens here in the community and is found in the pages of the Reformer as well as online at reformer.com. Good to see you, Chris.
Good to see you, too.
You excited about the Thanksgiving weekend? You going to hit the slopes?
Yeah. It opens tomorrow. Mount Snow opens tomorrow, and then I think I'll get out there Thursday before the big community Thanksgiving dinner in Brattleboro.
Are you going to be able to focus on our conversation today, or is your mind just going to be out there on the trails?
No, I can focus.
You can focus.
I work day to day, so.
That's true, actually. It is something where you kind of have to have that short-term attention span in order to pay attention to all the things that you have to pay attention to. Exactly. Lots to pay attention to here in the town of Brattleboro from last Tuesday's Select Board meeting. A number of stories coming out of that. I wanted to start with one that was in the Thursday edition of the Brattleboro Reformer, having to do with the discussion about the Windham Solid Waste Management District and all the participating towns. Now, we actually talked about this in our previous segment because the Select Board had made a vote to basically go forward with a plan that now they were saying a little bit of intrigue at last Tuesday's meeting because David Schoales, who's the representative for the town of Brattleboro on the Management District Board, they feel did not follow through on the town's plans. Talk a little bit about what exactly they were expecting David to do it was a November 10th meeting.
Mm-hmm. He was instructed to vote on a budget that discontinued the recycling facility at the district and also vote for a new assessment model that would be based half and half grand list and population rather than just the population assessment that's currently being used. But the vote didn't necessarily come up that way.
Right. They kind of changed the plan in the middle of that Windham Solid Waste Management District meeting right now. And you said recycling facility. Sometimes, and this word may come up in a soundbite we play, I can't remember, or it may come up in our conversation, but they call that the MRF. Right. For short, right?
Okay, yeah, so if materials recovery facility.
So if we say MRF, we're talking about that place on Old Ferry Road where people can take the recycling as well as their electronics and things like that. So now please continue. What happened at that November 10th Windham Solid Waste Management District meeting?
Before the meeting started, there was a finance committee meeting, and the chairman of the board of supervisors came up with this new idea rather than the assessment model with grand list and population. He thought about a 20% surcharge that would save the towns without transfer stations about the same amount of money, about 6% off the annual budget. So there was support for that among the transfer station towns like Dover and Wilmington, and those towns are some of the ones that are going to hurt the most if they went to this population grand list model.
Right. It would cost more for towns like Brattleboro as well, right, with the transfer station?
Well,
with the 50-50 split, or it would cost less?
I think it would cost less for them because they have the drop-off containers. That's pretty much where,
Right. But it all kind of went by the board when this 20% surcharge plan came about, and David Schoales, the representative, voted in favor of that. You were at that Windham Solid Waste Management District meeting, right? You attended that meeting as well. Talk a little bit about the decision there and why everybody was okay with this new plan.
Well, I think David saw, I could be wrong here, but I think he saw that there was a lot of support for keeping the MRF open among the other towns. And one of the things is they see this solar project down there bringing in an annual $100,000 to the district. So they think there's good things on the horizon.
Right. Now, he voted to basically have a plan that added this 20% surcharge and keep the MRF open.
Yeah.
That did not go over well last Tuesday with the Select Board. Let's play a quote from that meeting here. This is David Gartenstein. This is all coming up at the beginning, basically during Select Board comments, board reports, where David Schoales made the announcement about that decision of the 20% surcharge at the Windham Solid Waste Management District. So here is David Gartenstein's response to that.
I have some real concern with the board having voted to instruct its representative to the Solid Waste Management District to cast its votes one way and then those votes being cast another way. Real concern about how we're being represented then on the Wyndham Solid Waste Management District Board. It wasn't clear to me what happened from reading the newspaper. But now that I understand the way it shook out, I think that I'm also going to talk with the vice chair about having an agenda item, in the beginning of December about our representative, on the Wyndham Solid Waste Management District Board, because it sounds to me like, we said to do it one way and you cast the votes another way.
Basically, we set the vote one way, you cast it another way. Do you think David Schoales, to me, watching it on BCTV, he seemed surprised by this? Did you get that sense as well? He was surprised at this this backlash from Chair Gartenstein and the rest of the board?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, he is supposed to represent the town of Brattleboro, but there were a lot of things in play here. So I think he was kind of saying, well, you guys don't know everything that, was going on there. And it was funny for me because being at the meeting, afterwards, I was talking to people and they're like, you're not going to put everything in there, this motion amended to that motion. And, things got so convoluted. And I just thought, let's put this. It's hard enough to be, straightforward and, down to the point with some of this stuff at the district. But
yeah, and Schoales, basically his defense was the directive I was given never came up for a vote. We'll talk a little bit about that. We've got to go to a break right now, but we'll talk a little bit more about the decision made by the select board last week to come forward next Tuesday to replace David Schoales on the Wyndham Solid Waste Management District and what this all means for Brattleboro taxpayers. Chris Mays, my guest here from the Brattleboro Reformer on the Green Mountain Mornings program, will continue after the bottom of the hour news break. 30 degrees outside at 21 minutes before the 9 o'clock hour. Green Mountain Mornings continues now with your host, Chris Lenois, and Chris Mays of the Brattleboro Reformer in here talking about some of the stories he's covered in the past week, and you can find online at reformer.com. Chris, just to put a period on the end of the story about the Brattleboro Select Board and David Schoales voting one way, the Brattleboro Select Board feeling that he didn't vote the way that they wanted him to vote with regards to closing the MRF, that facility on Old Ferry Road, and reduce the cost burden for the town of Brattleboro. I do want to play the audio of David Schoales' defense, right? And you had this quote in your story about this in Thursday's edition of the Firm. But here's what David Schoales had to say. We played the bit with David Gartenstein, the chair, saying he was disappointed in the vote and was actually going to bring up an item at next week's Select Board meeting to replace David Schoales as the representative for the town of Brattleboro on the Wyndham Solid Waste Management District. Here is what David Schoales said about that.
The problem of having two hats, as we say, one of the responsibilities is to do what looks like is also, when I'm at that meeting, is also look out for the interests of the Waste Management District. And I think in balancing and looking at what the presentation was and the response to that compared to the response to the others, I think that was the right vote to make.
Now, I was asking you a little bit off air to clarify what David was talking about serving on both the Select Board and the Wyndham Solid Waste Management District Board. Those aren't two separate appointments.
no, on the board though, on the board of supervisors at the district, there is this mentality that we're a community, we're a district, and we got to kind of watch out for each other. So that's kind of what I took from what he said. Right,
which is trying to make sure everybody has access to this facility, thus the compromise, not the 50-50 split on how they were doing the assessments between population and the grand list, which would have been exorbitant for some communities, but this 20% surcharge, which still is going to be a lot for a lot of communities to bear, but not as bad for these other communities with regards to the 50-50 split that was being proposed.
I think he saw that as a compromise there. But then at the end of the select board meeting, he also said, now it's time for Brattleboro to really consider whether we want to keep sending our recyclables to the district.
Well, and that's the thing that you put in your story and point out that if Brattleboro abandons the district and just starts sending their waste to Rutland through Casella Waste Systems, which is an organization up there in Rutland, it would cost a significant amount less for the town of Brattleboro. You estimating this $60,000 if they had this stuff transported to Rutland versus a $173,000 assessment this year with existing operations, or $107,000 if the recycling is removed. But either way, that's still that's almost twice the amount when you're talking about going from 60,000 to 100,000. Why wouldn't Brattleboro vote down the being part of the district?
Yeah, there are some other services the district provides. Hazardous waste collection. You can get rid of a ton of different trash there and stuff that you can't necessarily throw away at landfills. So there's a few services like that, and outreach and education. There's different things to consider. So
now that Old Ferry Road facility wouldn't necessarily close if Brattleboro withdrew from it, but Brattleboro residents wouldn't have access to it. Is that how that would work?
Yeah. As I understand it, yeah.
In the town of Brattleboro residents wouldn't be able to go and drop things off there. I don't see that going over so well.
They might be,
okay.
Yeah.
That'll be an interesting conversation if it gets to that point. And decisions will be made on this next Tuesday, right?
Yeah. That I think, the representation on the Board of Supervisors is going to come up, as well as, the future with the district. On the same night, the district is voting. They're having their public hearing on the budget and assessment, so it'll be interesting. I don't know how I'm going to be in two places at once, but
it's a big night for trash next Tuesday. The town of Brattleboro has a special select board meeting tonight, actually, and then last week and this week, all these meetings that they're going to be basically meeting weekly to discuss the budget for the coming fiscal year. This plays a big role, perhaps, in what they decide with regards to the Wyndham Solid Waste Management District, next week, because this unexpected cost with the fire department and this truck with a cracked frame, $525,000 to replace this truck, and they've got to do it, right? They've got to find money to buy this new fire truck.
Yeah, they really want to, because they think it's vital to their response.
Yeah, this was in Friday's paper. Your story about this, a new pumper truck for the town of Brattleboro. Talk a little bit about how this plays into it. I mean, Peter Elwell, since coming on as town manager, has tried to be more mindful in terms of planning for things like this, but obviously sometimes things like this just come up and they're just not ready for it.
Yeah, they don't want to borrow money for vehicles, and that's been part of the plan since Elwell came on. And so their idea is to replace that and a rescue truck all in one item, and that would be $550,000 as opposed to the $525,000 just for the pumper truck. And the reason why they need to replace the pumper truck now is because it failed inspection. It has a cracked frame and a lot of rust underneath. So. Yeah,
and as you point out, if they don't replace it, they're basically relying on all these volunteer services more from the surrounding towns. And really, Brattleboro, being Brattleboro and the hub, they're probably the fire department that gets called to support more places. That makes this pumper truck even more essential to some of these outlying towns, I would think.
Yeah. And there's been a decrease in volunteerism in the outlying towns, and that was noted by Peter Elwell. And he said, this would leave us vulnerable if there was a structure fire in town.
Yeah, it's going to be a hard decision to make, and I could see that when they're trying to balance all the figures here, that affecting their decision next week as well, in terms of if there's a significant savings on leaving the Wyndham Solid Waste Management District. I could see that being a factor in terms of how they make a decision next Tuesday, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's all related to money, so
it's all comes out of the same pool of money in some way, shape, or form. A bit of good news for the Central Fire Station project. As they continue to develop the West Brattleboro Fire Station and the Central Fire Station, as well as the new police headquarters on Black Mountain Road, the former Brattleboro Reformer building. They were expecting to have some news about contamination in the soil at the Central Fire Station, but your story Friday says that even though there was some found, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, it's not going to affect the budget or the schedule, so it wasn't really too big of an issue, but they did find pieces of metal, concrete, a half a tank of oil, and a drill bit auger. So
So a lot of stuff in the ground there.
Yeah.
Now, so they had this was the similar kind of assessment they did at the Brattleboro Reformer Building when they were concerned about ink in the water. Was it a similar process, sending it up to the state? This is something that had oversight from an independent body.
Yeah, I'm not too sure how that panned out, but it happened while they were excavating the land. They found this stuff, and they kind of knew something was gonna come up. So.
Yeah, all right. Lots of stuff happening at the meeting and the select board meeting last Tuesday, and I believe this story. This story did not come up in the select board meeting, but you went to a meeting last Thursday for the Inclusion Center. Mm-hmm. Here in the town of Brattleboro, which is a place for people with disabilities to gather and discuss issues. And I thought this was really interesting. This is in yesterday's Brattleboro Reformer, talking about essentially the Trump effect, right? Yeah. Both in terms of actual policy that could be put into place and, these incidents that are being reported as being part of this new emboldened mentality among bullies. And certainly we've seen the president-elect bully people with disabilities publicly. It was something that he did for that journalist with disabilities. We have not heard of incidents like that being reported here in our community yet, have we?
No, not yet.
So this was a preemptive discussion, not something that was in response to something that happened.
No, this was really just just to talk after the election. They were saying that people have been nervous and concerned and worried. Yeah,
for good reason. When we're hearing reports from other communities about these attacks on people who are different, whether it's their ethnicity or whether it's somebody with a disability or somebody who is LGBTQ. But there are also real policy ramifications to this with regards to the ADA.
Yeah, they want to make sure, the local people want to make sure that nothing changes around here in terms of making buildings more accessible and making sure, people feel comfortable in the community. There's also concern about the Affordable Care Act and whether, if Trump repeals it, like he said he has wanted to, what could that mean for people, getting healthcare services?
Yeah. Was there any action item leaving that meeting that people decided they were going to do in terms of trying to get more people involved, in terms of trying to raise awareness, anything like that? Or?
The one thing I think I heard at the meeting was they wanted to kind of put up posters at the Brattleboro Food Co-op about kindness and being respectful towards one another.
Yeah. Sabine Ryan of the Brattleboro Food Co-op, one of the people at that meeting that Chris covered and people can read about in yesterday's paper online at reformer.com. Story you have in today's paper to close, a nice bit of news for a local family, this hunter, Jack Chapman. Yeah. You got to talk to him after being missing up in northern Vermont for 4 days.
Yeah, he had a real sense of humor about everything. He said he didn't recommend it unless you really want to become an expert in recovery. That was like one of the first things he said to me. But I guess he found some shelter under some logs that had fell down, and he stayed warm that way. And he just kept walking until, for a few days until he met up with Border Patrol and they took him to safety, and he went to the hospital. He had a bag of fluid. He didn't want to drink any of the water out in the woods, so.
72 years old and truly a survivalist. It really speaks for the old Vermont hunter and their ability to be self-sufficient, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I called a day earlier and talked to his sister-in-law, and she pretty much said the same thing you just said. It's that, the old Vermonter in him. Yeah,
well, like I was telling you off air, I went to high school in my graduating class with one of his daughters, so I saw her put out the call on Facebook. Hopefully people can help spread the word and help find my dad. Glad that story had a happy ending. As they move into the Thanksgiving weekend, I'm sure they're going to be very grateful that he is home. Always grateful for you and other folks from the Brattleboro Reformer joining us here on the show, Chris. Hope you have a good holiday.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
All right, thanks. That was Chris Mays of the Brattleboro Reformer. You can find out more about them online at reformer.com. We will be back to wrap up this edition of Green Mountain Mornings right after these messages.